This is the Authority Company podcast, conversations with leaders that are designing our future. Hola, I'm Joe Pardavila. And you know how there's like a billion books about entrepreneurs embracing failures and learning from their mistakes, blah, 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 blah. Yeah, we know all about that. But how about dealing with a crisis? Many companies run into it, but there aren't a lot of books that help you deal with that. Well, now there's one. It's called The Crisis Compass: How to Communicate When It Matters Most. The author is Michele Ehrhart, a crisis communication strategist with over 2 decades working in the world of high-stakes crisis and global organizations. We're going to talk about the best steps to take during a crisis and also the things you should avoid doing, plus how we can prepare ourselves for the next crisis. Michele Ehrhart, welcome to the podcast. How are you?
I'm good, Joe. Thanks for having me.
You're very welcome. Congratulations on the new book. And before we get into it, I want to sort of unpeel the title, which includes the word crisis. And so I'm very much a stickler on people using words correctly. And I don't mean like I'm like a grammar pert nerd, because I am certainly not. And you'll come to find out, Michele. I'm talking about in terms of like the idea that words matter. And we live in this world where, and I'm a fan of hyperbole. I like hyperbole as much as someone, but they use words that really don't belong. Like one of my like nitpicky things is when someone says, "Oh, I'm suffering from anxiety. This, my job is," and I'm like, "Oh, have you been diagnosed? Have you been a doctor?" And like, no, but I feel like I have anxiety. I'm like, well, I mean, it's a little more than that. So the word crisis, that's one of those words that, as you probably know, Michele, people throw it around willy-nilly. Tell me what crisis means to you in terms of the gravitas behind it, because not all crises are created equal, but again, words matter, and crisis is one of those big words.
Right. So crisis, in my definition, is exactly what you imagine it to be. It is the very big deal, the bad day, the thing that could wreck an entire organization from a reputation brand perspective. It is often misused, but I use it quite literally in the book to mean life and death, because I've been in situations where I'm managing the brand and reputation for a large organization, and it was an active shooter. Doesn't get any more crisis than that. So I mean it in the true sense of the word. But I do unpack a little bit of that in the book on what's a bad day and what really is you have to call in the troops and lock yourself in the proverbial war room and figure out what's going to happen. I also spend a lot of time in the book talking about how to avoid the crisis, because that is the number one rule in crisis mitigation, is try to avoid it. And if you can get in front of something that is not a crisis and keep it from becoming one, that's pretty much what you were probably hired to do.
Yeah.
Make it not happen. So that, I mean the real crisis. I mean the one that makes your stock price go up or down.
Good stuff. All right, awesome. And so, you know, one thing that's interesting as a card-carrying Gen Xer, and I'm not going to age him, Michele. I don't know. I don't care what age demographic you're in, but as a Gen Xer, crisis meant end. Like if you were in a crisis, your either company imploded, you lost your job, relationships. Now there's this amazing sort of, I don't know, dynamic where people are steamrolling through crises, and they're like using the power of, whether it's their bully pulpit, whether it's the power of their community, to get through it. Like, and with that, again, I always hate to use this phrase, but without getting political, you are seeing now politicians survive crises that they would never have survived 20, even 10 years ago. So what do you, when people bring up, when you work with folks that are suffering through a crisis and they're like, let's just stream through this. Maybe it's going to be okay. Maybe we'll just keep going forward. What do you think about that incredible dynamic that's taking place now?
Well, I'm a card-carrying Gen Xer myself, Joe, so you don't offend me at all. And I've lived through those times where it wasn't as easy to get through a crisis, but the world has changed. I mean, look, we're having a podcast. We're having a conversation through technology that probably would have been a lot harder for us to do, and we couldn't have done it remotely. We would have had to have been in the same studio using the big microphones. The world's changed. Social media has changed what is a crisis and what isn't. When you're in it, it feels like a crisis. If you're in it, your company probably feels like it could be the end when it's something that is that devastating. There are things that happen in day-to-day business that might feel like it could be a crisis, but it ends up never seeing the light of day. The work still goes into it. and you don't enter a crisis without thinking you can plow through it and get through it, or you wouldn't do it. I often joke that people who work in the crisis communications or risk management or anyone who's out there looking for the bad things that can happen, they're a different breed. I don't think I ever intended to be an expert in crisis communication. That sort of happened in my career, and I go into that in the book a little bit too. But when you're in it and you get through it and you turn back and you look behind you and you go, oh, I want to do that again. Not everybody feels that way.
Yeah.
So this book is for those people who are out looking for the next fire because they want to help put it out. There's just something very invigorating about being in the moment. It's not fun. It's hard work, but you know what you're doing is important and it's making a difference.
That's awesome. All right, I want to get into your journey and the book, but one more thing, since we're both admittedly the coolest generation, Gen X.
Yes, we're very full.
There's a Netflix documentary that's running, and I'm surprised that no one has done this in years, but it's basically about the Tylenol crisis that happened in the 80s when someone had slipped cyanide in capsules and people died as a result of it. And as a little kid, this was one of those like mile marker moments where you'll like remember for the rest of your life, where your mom's like, no, don't take Tylenol. We're going to throw out all the Tylenol. But fast forward, what is now almost over 30 years, the company behind Tylenol and Tylenol itself is well and good. Like, there are people on this planet, Michele, again, not as cool as us, who may not even remember that incident.
They might if they read the book, because I put it in the book. It's the case study. It's the case study for how to do a crisis well. Look, they did not have anything to do with what happened to their brand. A bad actor came in and took over their brand, and they said, no, you're not going to do that. And here's what we're willing to do. We're going to stop producing the product. We're going to pull it from the shelves. We're going to take the loss, and we're going to go out and tell you how to make it better. Oh, and we're also going to create something that was never created before. We're going to put these safety seals on it so that you feel confident when you buy our product that it is safe. It's brilliant. It's what every company should do. They should be transparent. They should be forthright. You don't hide from something like that. And you go in and you become part of the solution instead of letting this bad actor who tainted the product ruin their brand. And now I don't have any problem taking Tylenol. I give it to my kids, and I feel really great about every product, not just Tylenol, that has a safety seal on it. They created an industry out of their crisis. So there are ways to survive a crisis and thrive. And then I have some examples in the book of when you don't do it right. It can end your company. Maybe not right away, but the value of the brand is lessened, and you may never bounce back from it.
So give me the other side of that coin. We got the Tylenol side that, like, straight A's. They pulled it off miraculously. Who are some that you can point out? Maybe just one, because I want people to dive into the book and get more to the nitty-gritty. But who's in the subject of like doing it right, doing it wrong? Who's done it wrong?
There's several examples of doing it wrong, and I'm going to go back to what you mentioned about why it's different now than it was when we were younger, when you went through a crisis, because social media makes everything instant. So you've got several brands who have associated themselves with celebrities. And they are people, they are humans, and some represent your brand better than others. And if you don't react, you can lose customers. So the example that I'll give you, and it didn't tank their brand completely. They're still out there. There's still a Subway out there. But they didn't separate from their celebrity fast enough, and they took a pretty big hit on their brand for a long-term period of time because they weren't decisive and they weren't transparent and they didn't come about it quick enough. So I don't think that there's one example, one like ringing example to me of, well, you didn't do this right, so now you're out of business. I mean, look at Enron. Enron's issue changed the way companies operate forever. So there are things that you don't remember Enron about, but you remember why you have to do it now because of something that they didn't do well. So to me, those are the examples that you don't want that to be why people remember you.
The subway is great because I think the idea of it being, I think at the time, one of the fastest growing franchises. I think at one point was like bigger than McDonald's and all the other big fast food chains. And I think it was almost like a perfect storm what hurt Subway, because essentially their main product was a $5 footlong, which they were taking a loss on. Combine that with the fact that you have the Jared scandal, and then the economics of it all, be like, oh shoot, our spokesperson sucks, and oh, by the way, we're going to raise the prices of our sandwich. So again, not again, one of the things, maybe they could have worked around the economics of it, but the Jared example is a great one. And you talked about the fact that this is not something as a little kid. So growing up in the '80s, I grew up wanting to be the next David Letterman. What did Michele Ehrhart want to do growing up in the '80s with her bangled bracelets, maybe Madonna?
Big hair.
Yeah, the big hair. Yes. What were you thinking you were going to do as a grown up?
Oh, it changed a lot. I think I've reinvented myself so many times throughout my career that I can't say it's one thing, but I did get a degree in radio, TV broadcasting, and I thought I was going to be a news anchor because that's what you did. And I quickly realized that that is not what I wanted to be doing. I loved the idea of storytelling. There were a lot of different ways you could go about storytelling, and ended up in advertising, which similar at the time. And then backed my way into a corporate job at FedEx, where I spent 22 years. And I spent 22 years at that company because I could reinvent myself and never have to leave the company. So I started out in a marketing atmosphere, got my MBA, and ended up in the brand organization. So you think about the shiny, pretty parts of how you go out and tell your story about a brand. Everything looks good. There's no dirty vehicles. The lighting's always nice. Everyone's wearing a nice, crisp uniform. That's the side of the brand that people see, and you can control some of that. I spent about 5 years there, got into the communication side of things, and wanted a promotion, and was told I didn't get the promotion because I didn't have enough media experience within the company. So I thought, well, great. If I'm not going to get the experience, that I'm going to go back to the advertising side, because that's the part where, I know I can grow. But I had a leader who saw something in me. And to this day, I'm not sure if he liked me or didn't like me, but he called me into his office and he said, we want to get you more experience on the media side. So we're going to put you in the crisis communications area. And I did that job for 4 months or 5 years, depending on how you look at it, because in the 4 months that I was there, I got so much experience. And the importance of that is that it was a lateral move that I didn't ask for, but someone said, go to this side of things. And what I saw was the underbelly, the vulnerability of a brand. I'd spent my entire career putting out your best face and your best foot forward. Then I got to see all the areas where all that hard work could come crumbling down very quickly if you aren't being proactive and mitigating your risk. Had I had the book that I've just written in my hand at that point, I would have felt far more confident. Now I figured it out. I had a lot of great people around me who taught me how to do those things. But that moment, those 4 months, really changed the trajectory of my career, and I couldn't get away from it. I was addicted. I loved it. I was good at it. I wanted to do more of it. And so every step from that point forward was either leading crisis communications or had some component of leading that organization, because I really felt that the marriage of the two were so important. There's just so much you can do to go out and sort of guide the narrative, and inevitably a bad day is going to happen. And are you prepared? And what are you going to do when that bad day happens? And so that led me to the rest of my career, which I ended up leaving FedEx after 22 years, after COVID, after all of the heavy that comes with all of that, and said, I just want to do this kind of work and help people get better at crisis communications. So I stepped foot into the University of Memphis to be a consultant. And I left with the job description, and they kind of hooked me in. And now I'm leading marketing and communications for higher ed, and I'm loving it.
Wow. That's awesome. What a great story. And it's funny too, because I know you mentioned that like a crisis is almost akin to like a black swan event. But I feel like when you deal with a larger company like FedEx, you're going to have like these mini crises. And you mentioned that the evolution of technology. For many years, if a delivery driver tossed a package, with aggression or with lack of care, you wouldn't know about it unless the person saw there was a damage inside, and then they call up and then they go through the rigmarole of insurance and stuff. But now, because of that technology, we have Ring cameras every freaking where. And when a delivery driver who's maybe in a bad mood, had a bad day, or maybe just doesn't care about their job, decides to chuck a fragile package 20 feet towards the door, it reverberates not just into the package in the door, but to the company. So when it comes to large organizations like that, when you have sort of like these mini crises, am I saying? I don't even know if I'm saying that right. What's the plural of crisis?
Crises.
Oh, crisis. Okay. So when you have, thank you very much. So when you have like these mini crises, how do you handle that differently from like a major one? Because when you do get those stories that pop up on the nightly news, like FedEx driver threw this package of a rare heirloom and it's now cracked, and now all of a sudden you have this going on. How do those differentiate behind the scenes?
It's interesting too because it's changed over time. I remember the very first package toss that got national media that stopped us in our tracks, and we had to get our head of operations out to talk about that this is not how we normally do things. Then the second time it happened, which wasn't that far over because cameras are everywhere, we used the same approach and it backfired. You can't do the same thing twice and expect the same outcome because it's going to be different. And the reason it backfired is because now it wasn't a crisis. It was, here's another one. So you have to react to the moment that you're in based upon the moment that you're in. So for that example, national news or local news, as FedEx driver does this, you sit and you watch and you wait. Did it get any traction? Did social media take off with it? Did it get a lot of views? Are people still talking about it? You wait a news cycle and you said, okay, that wasn't a crisis at all. It could have been. But what we did was wait and see, or we released a statement that said, we are aware of this incident and this is not how we operate. And we put great pride in delivering packages well. So it just depends on the situation, whether it becomes a crisis or not.
Yeah. It is funny too, because of the amount of news out there. It could just be the timing of when it happened. It could be like as you know, as an old journalism student, like a slow news day, nothing going on. Oh, let's make this FedEx story the big.
We have nothing else. Let's make this a story. And think about the higher ed environment right now. It is content rich for opportunities for the media to take off with something because it's just very unstable in the sense of not knowing what's next. And so I have to talk to my team a lot about, let's just see how this plays out before we actually really feel like we need to engage in the story.
Yeah.
And that's very different.
Yeah, no, I can't even imagine what it's like now, because it's like it's almost like you're like a meteorologist. You're like, okay, is this going to be a heavy rain, or is this going to be a little sprinkle? Do I really need to worry about this? So yeah, no, that's the fascinating part of your business. One of the things I want to dig in the book is about you have the 4 elements of clarity, connection, compassion, and control. I think the last one I want to kind of delve into the deepest is because control. As you crisis communicators know, and publicists and media people know, it's all about control. And the 2 words, control the narrative, or 3 words. How do you, I guess, brace for that? Because as we've kind of alluded to, sometimes it's completely out of your control. So how do you keep that control piece when you're working with this sort of like framework of the way you handle a crisis?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think it's important to remember what the definition of control is. What do you control? You don't control what people are saying about you. You don't control the circumstances that are happening. What you do control is what you're going to either say about it or do about it. And that's the decision that has to be made. Are we going to do something different because of what we know? And if we are, do we want to tell people about it? That's controlling the narrative. So then they can say whatever they want to say. But if you're going to change the way you operate or change a process because of something that's happened, Be transparent about that when you make your media statement. It can't just be, yeah, we're aware. It's got to be, we're aware. Here's what we're going to do. And here's why that is important. And that is, in my book, talking about the way you can control the things you can control. Because you're right, none of the rest of it, you can't control it. If something goes viral, you have to make decisions on how perhaps you stop the spread of misinformation or disinformation. That's about all you can control in a crisis.
And in the book, you get into the compassion piece. And why do you think that's overlooked? I mean, you talk about it a bunch in it, but like, why is it? Because is it one of those things where it's like, and one of the adages I really hate is like, don't take it personal. It's business, that whole thing. And so I think that sometimes gets souped up in the whole mess of crises where like, okay, let's get all cold, hard, and, show no emotion here. So let's dig into the compassion piece a little bit.
Well, you're right. It's business is business, but we're all people. And we all have a feeling about the business that's happening. And so you can't talk about the starkness of, in the book, I talk a lot about the situation I went through in an active shooter situation. You have to show compassion because that's a tragedy, no matter how you look at it, no matter who caused it. Lives were lost. So you have to show empathy. That's obvious. But you should also show empathy when someone throws your package. That package was important to you and you spent your hard-earned money for it. So business can still be business and there can still be empathy and compassion. And you want to feel connected. You feel connected to the brands you love. If that CEO comes out and says something about your brand, you want to feel connected to that CEO. So it has to have that level of compassion. And that's the external facing. And a lot of what I talk about in the book is leading, being a leader during a crisis. And the people who are working that crisis, it's exhausting. It often takes days for it to come to an end. At the end of it, people haven't slept. They haven't eaten. They haven't seen their families. So as a leader, the compassion is leading by example, saying, you know what, we've been up since 3 a.m. I'm going to tap out. I'm going to have these people in charge, and then we're going to rotate out so you can do it as well. Showing that ability to be human in the midst of trying to do your job and to put your best face forward in a bad situation. So it's a little of both.
Yeah, that's good. I segued from like entertainment media to business media 5 years ago, and the one thing that I had trouble with the most was the freaking acronyms. They got an acronym for everything in the world of business, as you know, Michelle. And one of them is KPI. And it took me, I think, a good year and a half to ask someone like, "What does KPI mean?" And so, key performance. And so, what is a KPI or ROI, whatever you use your favorite acronym, Michelle, in terms of assessing a crisis and in terms of a response and judging that response? Is there a scorecard? Can we assign numbers to like, or like the Alamo Alley, the green, yellow, red thing? Like, how is there a way to gamify crisis response?
So key performance indicators for a crisis really depend on who you work with and work for. There are so many things you can do to measure it now, which is something you and I didn't know, card-carrying Gen Xer, when we first started because the technology wasn't available. AI has changed the landscape in a lot of really great ways. When you think about crisis communications, you can measure sentiment now. You can look at how your social media is tracking. You can go through and see comments that are being made and determine if there's another path you have to take because of what's going on with your crisis. So a key performance indicator could be a lot of different things. I'll use the university as an example. We're a university. We are free speech. We want you to go talk about the things you want to talk about. And some of those things are met with controversy. Is it worth the university coming in and talking about each of those or talking about any of those? Because we create an environment for kids to become adults. So looking at how social media sentiment works, looking at the traction of earned media. Did someone pick up the news story on the AP Wire and run with it? Is it now going farther? Those are key KPIs to determine if you need to change your course. And if what you already did worked or didn't work. So you don't necessarily have to wait anymore for the crisis to be quote unquote over for you to change direction, because you get some of those indicators pretty early on. And it is a great tool if you use it. But you often find that, CEOs that have been in their place for a long time think they know how to handle it. And so you've got to be able to convince the people that you work with and for that you should shift direction. So to me, KPIs are, at the end of the day, did it hurt your brand? And certainly if it's a bad thing, it probably didn't help your brand. But did it hurt your brand beyond repair, or just a little bit? Or what is the sentiment that's going on around buying your product? You can measure all of those things. Most large companies already have those in place.
Interesting. And how about the sort of sweat equity and relationship people put in towards their either consumers, viewers, what have you? Like, I mean, I almost feel like there's almost a bit of like cognitive dissonance of like, people love Apple. Apple could do no wrong. But then if you think about, the way Apple makes phones in China, or, put any company, Nike, yet it's amazing. Like, you saw Trump during the whole tariff situation was like, yeah, we're going to tariff everything that's going on in China except the iPhones. We're not going to tariff the iPhones because the last thing Trump wants to do is go after the cult of iOS. But how important is it to create sort of that, I don't know, like that bucket of compassion that, like, even if a crisis does arise, it's like, whoop, it's gone. Talk about that in terms of like the work you could put in before a crisis happens.
I call it the goodwill bank. It's the bank of goodwill. And what are you doing to fill that bucket up? We talked a lot about that at FedEx. FedEx is a large global company, but they put their money where their mouth is when it comes to really pouring into the communities where they live and work and giving back. And there's a lot that comes from when you spend one side of your time promoting the brand and talking about all the good things that the company does, that on the bad day, people remember that. And it is always on crisis mode. I mean, when you're out talking about the good your company does, it is going to help you if something bad happens. And how you handle the crisis is going to help you at the end of the day. Look at what Tylenol did. So it's a couple of things, but your goodwill bank goes a long way. And you can do that as a startup. You can donate your time. You can donate your resources if you don't have money. So there's ways to do that at every level, but I call it the goodwill bank, and it is absolutely critical. And it's how big companies end up bouncing back quickly, because you're right. Nobody's going to take my Apple phone away from me. And even when it stops working after the few iOSs and it won't update anymore, I'm going to go get another one.
Right.
Because it's a brand that I trust and respect.
That's great. That's great. Speaking of bad and FedEx, how did FedEx survive stranding Tom Hanks on an island for 4 years and still be a successful company? Because, I mean, people don't forget that our America's treasure, Tom Hanks, was stranded on a deserted island because he crashed in a FedEx plane. Were you involved in the crisis of that? Tell us about the behind the scenes of recovering from that.
My first few months of working at FedEx was going to the premiere of that movie. And the vice president of marketing at the time stood up and said, "What you're about to see is fictitious. We would never have vehicles this dirty. We don't wreck planes. But at the end, we always deliver the package." And then we watched the movie and we agreed with all of it. No, it was talk about a wonderful brand film that you didn't have to go out and create on your own. And it was something that Tom Hanks met with Fred Smith, the CEO of FedEx, because Tom Hanks voiced the narration of the World War II memorial in Washington, D.C. So they met then, and he pitched the idea, because I promise you, if it come to the brand department, because at one point I did screen all of the story ideas that came through where they wanted FedEx to be part of it, I'm pretty sure it wouldn't have gotten out of the brand department to say yes. But when the CEO is willing to do it, I mean, and look what it does. It's a forever commercial for the company that's going to be around for a really long time.
Yeah, I mean, that movie's from 1999, and I'm an idiot like me still bringing it up, 26 years later. So it just goes to show you the impact.
They still give out at FedEx, they still give out the Wilson volleyball.
No way.
They do.
That's awesome. That's great. That's so cool. All right, I'll wrap things up. A couple things. So, 2025 was a bad year for crisis communicators, Michele, because for the first time, they became news stories. And I'm going to tie this into my old school entertainment world is the Justin Baldoni, Blake Lively situation that went down, where all of a sudden these crisis communicators who were brought on to help Justin during his whole kerfuffle going on, we're not going to get into the weeds of that, but all of a sudden people were like, wait, you hire somebody to deal with this? Because I think in the business worlds, I think we all knew people like you existed, Michele, but now all of a sudden people are like, wait a minute. So when an actor, something bad goes on with an actor, they call up like essentially like these elevated PR companies to help them through it. What did you think when this whole story started popping up in 2025?
There's so many things to unpack in 2025. But in this particular example that you're asking me about, I would tell you that there's a brand. If I'm an actor, my reputation and my brand is important to me. And I would do what any company does and hire a crisis communicator to help me navigate that. It's what crisis communications people do. I would do the same thing if I had $1 bazillion and needed some.
I always wrap these up now, Michele.
I would hire me.
Have you worked with celebrities?
A little.
A little. Oh, I sound very vague. Very well.
No, yeah, I can't talk about all those things.
Okay, all right. Well, what you can talk about is the ending of this podcast. Is I always like to wrap things up with the dedication of the book, and you dedicate your book to Ryan, who taught me that if it isn't bleeding or dying, we can fix it. So who's Ryan, and why did you feel the need to dedicate the book to him?
So Ryan is my husband, and Ryan is a former police officer, and I am a former theater person. So you can imagine the dynamics of that. He has seen all of the bad things, and I am full of drama. So he told me early in our relationship, if it's not bleeding or dying, we can fix it. And it was kind of a mantra that he would bring up occasionally. And he's also my biggest fan. He's the one that told me to write all of those things down so that I would remember my worth. And he's the one who encouraged me to write the book. It wouldn't happen if he hadn't been there doing all of those things. So it just made sense to dedicate it to him. And I often remember his words when I'm in the middle of something that just feels awful. And I'm doing that for a company or for whatever it is that I'm working on. And I'm remembering that, look, at the end of the day, it's not bleeding or dying. We can fix it.
Awesome. Her name is Michele Ehrhart. The name of the book, Crisis Compass, How to Communicate When It Matters Most. Michele, thanks so much for your time. I really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me, Joe.
And that's going to do it for this episode. If you want to find out more information about Michele and her other amazing authors, go to theauthoritycompany.com.